The most meaningful compliment that I've ever received from a parent was, "Thank you for caring about my child." I've learned that students won't always remember what you taught them, but they will always remember how you made them feel. The students feel valued when they walked into your classroom. Did they realize that they could do or be anything that they put their minds to, they put forth the effort? Or were they afraid to raise their hands because they didn't want to be ridiculed or lashed out at? Did they feel empowered to ask for help when they needed it? Or did they pretend to understand just to stay under the radar? As an elementary school student, I can remember struggling academically when I transitioned from my small Catholic school with one curriculum into the public school system that had a much stricter and fast-paced curriculum. As a result of that transition, I had an extremely difficult time catching up with my third grade peers who had always been enrolled in the public schools and trying to play catch up, unfortunately spilled over into the fourth grade, where I still found myself a step behind. I can recall to this day teachers who grew frustrated when I didn't immediately understand, and who would sigh when I would ask a follow-up question. After a while, they called my mother in for a conference and even recommended that I be evaluated for special services. My mother, knowing my potential as a student, objected, but decided to go forward with her own independent testing to once and for all dispel any concerns. Needless to say, I blew the test off the scale, and there was no need for further evaluation. As educators, we must remember that special education isn't a place, but a service. Special education isn't a place, but a service. Although a great deal of my struggles during those early academic years dealt with the gap between the curriculum of the two schools, a portion of my struggles also dealt with how I was made to feel by my teachers. Not once did they tell me that I could do it. Not once do I remember them displaying the patience or sending home supplemental work. If I struggle with cursive, why not send home some cursive sheets? Unfortunately, for any student that didn't immediately grasp a concept, they became impatient and attempted to put students into the most restrictive educational environment instead of the least. I can recall one specific occasion when my mother was greatly concerned about my academics and the lack of care that was being shown in my school. So she came for a classroom observation. The teacher didn't recognize her immediately as a parent. And you know how teachers in some of those other counties put on their best performance when being observed? Well, that's what she did. I know that we don't do that here in Carlton County, right? She immediately jumped up from her seat where she normally taught and began moving around the classroom, Dr. Foster. And throughout the span of her 20 to 25-minute lesson, she called on every student in the class except for one. Anybody want to guess who that one student she decided to overlook was? You're looking at him. Even as I raised my hand in attempts to participate, I was ignored. I will never forget how that made me feel as a student. So when I became an educator, myself several years later, I was careful with how I made my students feel and encouraged them that they could do it, even if their standardized scores weren't where we wanted them to be. When they did poorly on assignments, I still told them that they would have better success next time around with a little more hard work. We must ask ourselves each day as students walk into our classrooms, did they feel valued? Did we make them feel like somebody? Did we tell them that they were intelligent, beautiful? Did we push them when they were being too lazy to reach their full potential? It wasn't until I entered Mrs. Meyer's fourth grade classroom did I truly build my confidence back up after a disastrous year and a half, where I was made to feel as if I couldn't perform by the educators whose care I had been entrusted to. You see, it took having a supportive mother at home who would work all day, but come home in the evenings to teach and reteach topics at home. At home, our hallways were covered with vocabulary words and times tables. It also took having a supportive teacher at school willing to go the extra mile. And I found that in Ms. Myers, who was a strict yet loving teacher, and ensured that her students had the opportunity to find success in her classroom. She expected excellence from each of her students, sought to provide opportunities to enhance our lives, and we had no choice but to reach the high expectations that she set. I've learned from my own experiences that we should never count any child out regardless of their struggle. Our students might currently face behavioral, academic, or even environmental struggles. However, their current situation shouldn't dictate their future outcomes. And as educators, we must work to ensure their success. After leaving Mrs. Myers' fourth grade class, I went on to middle school and high school, where I excelled academically, socially, and professionally. I then attended Winthrop University, where I became the student body president and a member of the board of trustees. From there, I went on to graduate from the #1 school of education in the country, Johns Hopkins. And now I walk the halls of the University of South Carolina School of Law, where many of the greatest leaders and decision makers in our state and nation were produced. Although each of those accomplishments are important, I would never share them to be boastful or to brag. But I shared them to say that it took having some bad experiences in classrooms knocking me down for me to appreciate the good teachers lifting me up and pushing me to reach every goal set. It took educators leading the way to turn what far too many saw as a hopeless situation into a positive one. As teachers, we just never know who our students will become and the difference that we can make in their lives, as that young man just demonstrated earlier. Ask yourselves, how many students in my classroom fit the description of young Kambrell? And what am I doing to ensure his or her success?